Welcome to Momentum, a Race Forward podcast. 2 years ago, we welcomed People's Action Executive Director Sulma Arias for a conversation about the launch of the Organizing Revival, a long-term effort to rebuild grassroots organizing as the foundation for a stronger, more participatory democracy. At the time, it was both a diagnosis and an invitation. It asked what it would take to rebuild relationships, develop new leaders, and strengthen the organizations that help communities shape their own future. Much has changed since that conversation. The country has navigated another presidential election, rising political polarization, growing economic uncertainty, and continued challenges to democratic institutions. Through it all, organizers across the country have continued doing what they've always done, bringing people together, building trust, and creating opportunities for everyday people to exercise power in their own communities. With that in mind, we're revisiting our conversation with Sulma from a new perspective. What have the past 2 years taught us about organizing? What does it mean to build democracy during a period of uncertainty? And what will it take to create a multiracial democracy that can endure for generations? In this conversation, Race Forward President Glenn Harris and Sulma Arias reflect on those questions together, drawing on decades of organizing experience to explore the relationship between democracy, community, and collective action. This conversation is also part of Race Forward's new Democracy Is campaign. Through conversations, storytelling, and community engagement, Democracy Is asks how participation, belonging, accountability, and collective action strengthen democratic life and what it will take to build a just, multiracial democracy for generations to come. Here's their conversation.
Welcome, Sulma. It is so great to have you back on the Momentum podcast. I know we're using this as both an opportunity to have a little bit of conversation about the Organizing Revival Network, which we at Race Forward are excited to be supporting partners in, but also talk a little bit about this moment, this period.
It's so good to be here, Glenn. I am always inspired by the conversations we have, and I'm looking forward to diving in. And, I agree to your point, having an assessment talking about where things are. I'm looking forward to it. Thank you.
You know where I wanted to start? There's so much to say about the moment and why organizing matters, but just for our listeners, what do we even mean when we're talking about organizing? And, you and I have had lots of conversations about why we think it's a transformational practice. But can you talk about how organizing has transformed you personally and in what ways it shapes your leadership, your thinking today?
My favorite topic. So, I'm an immigrant from El Salvador. I arrived in this country when I was 13 years old. I spent half of my life, I'm 56 this year, really doing a lot of work through the church, really connecting to people. I think the work of church building is a work of discipleship, evangelism, and really getting into understanding and building connections with people. And then in the late 90s, I was approached by a woman by the name of Laura Dungan, who became my mentor. And she herself was a mentee of Shel Trapp, who is one of the co-founders of People's Action Institute and People's Action. That was my introduction into organizing. And what I discovered through the process that, I was being developed as a leader, and that there was, even though I had been doing work with people, the difference and the shift was that actually there were more things, like the people that I was talking to, a world opened up. I was having conversations with these people about the reality they were living, mold on their walls, high utility bills, a lack of infrastructure and the basic things that people need to live a healthy and thriving life. And that also people could be tapped into being part of the change. We can actually do something about the injustices that we're experiencing now. And that was, in my own experience, something deeper that was part of bringing it out into actually I can do that and I can have a voice now. And to me, that was transformational in my own life. And it became part of how I saw the world differently. At the same time that we nurture the soul, there's a material life that we have to live, and that is our responsibility to also try to change for the better.
I so love that, Sulma. A very similar, very similar story for me. I had the great privilege of being trained as an organizer by the founder of Race Forward. To your point about the transformational nature, I find in this moment, Gary Delgado, our founder, said to be an organizer is to be an optimist. But I think that optimism is really rooted in what you're naming. Is that understanding that there's always something you can do, that you can take action. It's not just hope. There's a sense of power in that, which leads me to our conversation. You were with us 2 years ago at the launch of the organizing revival. As a country, we've gone through 2 roughest years of my lifetime. And I'm genuinely curious, what have you learned about what it takes to build lasting grassroots power in this period? And if your understanding of organizing has evolved as a result of this political moment.
Yeah, this is such an important conversation because as I reflect, and we're actually in the middle of publishing a second document to the original document that we published when we came together, which was called The Antidote to Authoritarianism. In 22, when I came back to People's Action, we first started with reflecting on the current moment. This was 2022, after we had been through COVID, the 2020 election. And we started by offering an invitation to our peers in the movement for social justice to come and work closely together. Part of that invitation was, how do we overcome the long-standing rivalries, division that have kept us from creating a truly united front? The second thing that it meant, it was a reflection of People's Action, our own commitment to building a stronger movement, that we needed to be investing in deeper leadership development and training. It was an assessment of the state of organizing at that moment. We were looking at a crisis of disconnection, the climate crisis that continues to grow, and the crisis that in 22 and 23 we're looking at, if we don't organize, we will have, this is moving towards an authoritarian regime, and this is how we need to position ourselves. And after the 2024 election and where we are now, we're essentially been building the organizing revival in the time of authoritarianism, everything we had said, and we've been working on that within People's Action, but also with this set of partners that is now, close to 60 partners across the national ecosystem. That's why we started, right? We had an assessment, and we wanted to both flex our own muscle to how do we do this together, because none of us have enough power to do it alone. But there's something, Glenn, that you said to me a while back, and it was something about the making of democracy and what it really means. And you said our own organizations, our institutions in this moment are actually the kind of democracy that we want to build. That is the practice right now. In our own institutions, we are in this moment creating, we talk about this multiracial democracy that we want to build. Well, that is not it's not like this heaven over there. We're actually creating it right now. And I always think about that. And so, yes, that's what we're doing. We're creating the democracy and building the country that we aspire to live in and for our grandchildren to live in.
And just marked 250 years as a nation. And to your point, simultaneously find ourselves in this period of real racialized authoritarianism. Country is founded on that set of principles and ideas. And to be clear, another set of ideals about equality and justice and the pursuit of liberty and happiness. It's an odd moment to behold these things, but I'm genuinely curious as thinking about the antidote to authoritarianism. What are the patterns? What are you seeing? And how do you think we can both defend what we have and build towards something new that we all deserve in the ways that you were just naming?
A part of the analysis that we continue to have is the fact that dictators and authoritarianism itself continues to feed on the division and fear. And the reason why I believe and we believe organizing is the antidote, because organizing is the opposite of that. It's about how do I break a barrier of connectivity. At the core, the type of organizing that transformed my life was very much about reaching to that person, to tapping into another human being's potential. And sometimes when we live in like the hardest situations, sometimes we forget that we actually do have power and the power is in us, but nobody has said, actually, I can bring you to a meeting, you can talk to the city council, and tapping into that power. That's what organizing does. And that's why it's the antidote to the division, to the fear. We give up power when we're fearful and when we live in division. That's exactly what we have seen happen. And even more so now with the second term of this regime, we see an increased violence in our neighbors. Most of us organizers have been organizing the last 3 to 5 decades, Glenn, and I would love to hear from you on this as well. Yes, there's been periods, or this country, 250 years, is a history of violence, and is a history where our ancestors have had to fight for their very own humanity. However, in addition to that, organizers are dealing with an extra layer: artificial intelligence, the added climate crisis, and social media. There's all these things that are happening now that 30 years ago when I was organizing in Wichita, Kansas, yes, we saw it coming, but we're here now. And so with that layers, what does that mean for us and how we create transformative organizing in this moment where we're dealing with challenges that most of the organizers today have never had to deal with?
I so hear you. The realities of those additional layers, as you named, they, in some ways, in my mind, they stoke the authoritarian moment. It adds to that increased uncertainty, fear that authoritarian regimes take advantage of. I do think that part of that antidote is how we stay centered in ideas of hope and faith and love of humanity. One of the things that moved me, Sulma, was a reminder that authoritarian regimes function on a supply and a demand. And on the supply side, it's misinformation, it's disinformation, it's promoting fear, it's promoting hate. But on the demand side, it is playing into people's sense of overwhelm, folks' loss of faith in government and governance. And it begs this question that while we know that the only way to get out of this is around and connected to elections, the act of voting, we also know that does not fundamentally address everything that you just named. It doesn't address the reality of how people feel powerless in this moment when it comes to artificial intelligence, the climate, a fundamental belief that I can't own the institutions in my life. How are you all holding that? Because there is no question about the immediacy of people being activated and reminded of the importance of voting, and it's not enough in this moment.
Yeah, you said something about people have to experience change, and because what's at the wedges is like this mistrust, overwhelming of information and misinformation, disinformation, in order for people to even feel any excitement or understand how democracy works for them, I think it's the job of us as organizers. First, that emotional connection and love and caring for one another, the power of that cannot be underestimated. It does take time to build relationships that are transformational and powerful and that build. Democracy will become real for people when they understand how it connects to their everyday lives. That's why you hear most people say, well, my vote doesn't really matter. And authoritarianism feeds on people believing that their vote doesn't matter, believing that nothing really changes. And it's our job not only to be the optimist and to talk about hope, but also to demonstrate that together we can build it. And that is now in this time more challenging than ever, which is why with the organizing revival work, we brought 1,000 organizers together from across all of these networks. And we focused on what are the levers, what has changed now so that we can actually remind people that you need both. You need the connection, you need to build a trust, but that trust has to lead to a question. How do we want to govern ourselves? And one of the levers that is still fragile in this moment is our ability to decide and who governs us. Who do we want? That is still part of what this country still holds. It's fragile, and if we're not careful, we could lose that too, but we still have it.
You say this all the time. Every 60 or 70 years, this country comes back to this crisis moment. This is particularly acute. But this crisis moment of the Gordian knot that is race and democracy in the United States, are we going to actually address what separates us. It's cyclical, and deeply believe in that idea, not as a hopeless one, but as this constant reminder that we're not done.
Yeah, and it's fascinating to me because it's cyclical. We're not done, but it's also part of a backlash. My message over the anniversary of the 250th was that a lot of times is a moment of a lot of conflict for those of us people of color or those of us who are immigrants who feel that this country is always trying to push us out of deciding our own future. And for us to claim the fact that it's been 250 years of so many of our ancestors. We look at the first 100 years, how many people gave their lives to fight for their very humanity. And then it took another 100 years for those wins to be implemented. And now we are losing the very things that they gave their lives for. So not taking for granted the sacrifices. And I do think that there's something about every generation has to understand that you can know the history, but unfortunately, there's so much work to be done. 61 years into the win of the civil rights movement, those are simple but incredible things that give us all the rights that we have now. That is all part of how we create democracies. You start by asking questions. Why do things actually work the way they work? Is it by design or can we change it?
I love that you're naming the power of just a simple question of, is it by design? The other piece I really did want to lean into that you just named, Sulma, is that this is a period of pushback, that it is in response to real progress. And there's no question about the fact that for the first time in generations, we are losing the ground that we've already covered. To your point, I think it's critical that we do hold that truth of who we come from. And that in this moment, one of the things that I guess I'm always struck by when I think about my own family and my own history is our ancestors' ability to dream beyond their own time. Yes, we know what our opposition is. We understand that this backlash is fundamentally about their own fear of loss of power. And we also understand for us in this moment to get to the multiracial democracy that we all dream of, we've got to figure out how we're standing collectively stronger. In thinking about the work of the organizing revival, one of the things I've been so impressed by is not only naming why we organize, but what divides us. And I'm curious about how you're holding that in the organizing revival.
The reality is that there's always been those who are driven by extracting their power by oppressing. So it's about money and power, and people of color have always been the ones from the labor, and we continue to live in a very extractive, power hungry. There's a set of people who wanted to keep us out of really understanding that, who the enemy is. And that's why I love organizing, because organizing starts meeting people where they are. And then slowly through relationship, you bring people to really understanding the symptom, the thing that is hurting is actually part of a much deeper systemic problem. And eventually you help people understand who's behind. It's always greed, powers, money. And looking at that from that helps us understand that the reason why your rural hospital is closing, at the same time, you're seeing investments of millions of dollars in detention centers to house innocent families and children. Something about the way that the world is operating, we should all be asking, this doesn't make sense. The majority of us don't want to see that. The majority of people can't afford healthcare. The majority of the people can't afford their utility rates, their house payments or rent. This is unsustainable for most of us, while at the same time the gains of billionaires continue to rise. Something about that is not working. And all of these issues are part of the same systemic problem. They're symptoms. And so there is opportunity for us to reach millions of people. That is the antidote. So that is what we're trying to rebuild, and the muscle we're trying to flex through all of the organizations that are part of the organizing revival, right? That is the training, that is the discipline.
You know, one of the things that this period hasn't done for me is it has not shaken my faith in humanity. I believe in my neighbors. And I saw a study that was naming that 69% of Americans still support issues of equity and inclusion, not only just as a set of values, but want to see them expressed in the private sector, the public sector. And I think we forget in the midst of the way in which our opposition divides that actually most people are with us. They are wrestling with their own real fears, their worries about their families, their worries about the future, all the things we've been naming. I want to ask you this because we've talked about it, but it's so essential. Faith, spirituality, how we fundamentally at the end of the day see ourselves in relationship to each other, in the world. What's in me that I see in you seems like a more important question than any time in our history.
I think that is so real to me, and I'll start by sharing my own experience and story on this. I came to this country in the 80s, and that was a big time of a lot of the evangelical churches bringing in, especially in the Latino community. The reason why it's important, because to me, community of faith, I grew up in a Pentecostal church. It created a set of values and beliefs and practices and even rituals that are important for community, especially as a teenager, but for everybody. We all need those spaces. And like you said earlier, part of the reason for the isolation and the lack of feeling connected to community is because we've bought into this idea that we have to do it alone, or that the lack of trust in institutions that have failed us. At the core, there's a deep need at the spiritual level, regardless of your faith, to feel in connection to other human beings, and however you can do that. And the best way for that to happen is, part of it is the gatherings in churches. And so that has been, institutions and a way for people to come together to find something that is missing. It has also been used by the white Christian nationalists as a way to separate a group of people and use it against us in a way that is a total distortion of what I believe true Christianity is. It was important for me when I started inviting folks into being part of this organizing revival idea that we included faith organizations like Faith in Action, like Camellia, and organizations that could hold that, because for me personally, it's been important and what gives me grounding. But somewhere between my church organizing and secular organizing through People's Action, I learned that there was something unique about both ways in which we're organizing. And you know what that was? It was people. In both places, it was people who brought the magic. At the end, I had the same feeling of like, we just did something great because there was 10 or 15 or 500 people here, and we just decided together that we wanted to do this thing. And there was power there. I had the same high at the end of feeling super connected and feeling the hope that we could do this.
People are the solution. We've been talking a lot about family and our ancestors. And my mom, who was an organizer, didn't know it. But she used to always say, you have to have the courage to talk to the people who aren't with you yet. And you have to have the love to hold the people who have not yet joined you. And I lost my mom last year and been really holding all the things that I've learned from my parents. Been heavy on my mind. But it's also had me thinking just about where we're going, right? Like, there's something so powerful about just holding that cycle of life. I'm looking at my nieces and my nephews and thinking about both the challenges ahead and what they will bring into the world, because I have no doubt about their power. What are you holding if we think about this intergenerationally? It's always been about imagining a future, to your point, that is not a destination, but a horizon, right? That's justice is a horizon. And so we got some short-term work. We got some real work to do.
And this has been a conversation because we're all getting ready for the next electoral cycle, right? And we're all looking at what happens beyond 2028. One of two goals that we have in the organizing revival space is to stop authoritarianism and to build a bigger base. And if we engage, what happens if in 2028 we're not able to begin by creating, the democracy and to oust the current person out of office? Our organizing has to endure. How do you keep the faith? To your point, we come from ancestors who have done it and kept the work going. I think about the past to inform and continue for me to give me the inspiration. I'm about to enter that third stage of life when I feel the urgency to train younger generations about what it means to not only oh, is it about winning the campaign? Yes, we all want to win. It's about transforming people's lives. And I think that as organizers, that is an important balance to hold, because I was just talking to our amazing Ana Garcia Ashley last night after her retirement, and she was sharing with me the joy that she's finding now that she's not running a national network. She used to run the Gamelia network, just organizing and training new organizers and talking to people. I am finding that joy now, Glenn, in being part of a church community in Kansas City, where it's not about running an organization day to day. It's about sending at a table and say, hey, I'm offering free prayers. I mean, it goes back to the same. The way that we keep it going is by understanding that as organizers, no matter what happens, our job is to tap into people's own humanity and own power. The more that we do that, and I know it seems like too much of a simplistic thing, and it's the thing that we don't do enough of. I remember a person that was a leader of mine during my time that I did work at Firm and with immigrant rights organizing, people that, and this person ended up being deported. And we as organizers were like constantly, we're not winning the campaign. We're not winning this fight, like another loss. You begin to think, well, does this even work? Years after, when I talked to that person, and even, I'm at a convention right now for our friends at Popular Democracy, I see people that it's been 15 years and they're organizing. It changed their lives. Whatever I did 15 years ago changed their life in a way, just like my life was changed. That is what I'm talking about. But we need more of that. Of course, we need the policy wins. We need the political wins. But those cannot happen without us transforming each other in the process, because that's what's going to give us the hope, the resilience, and the inspiration to keep this thing going, and for my children and my grandchildren to keep going. That's my plan, Glenn. What's yours?
This conversation for us is part of our Democracy Is campaign. And as an organization, we're trying to create space for this conversation that really centers us in what does democracy require in this moment that's not just about elections. And we're hoping that through that dialogue that we get the chance to examine how participation, how, as our conversation is today, about belonging and accountability, how those things shaped democratic life and strengthen the possibility of a real, just, multiracial democracy. And so we launched in thinking about this moment of the 250th anniversary of the United States. But we see it as the beginning of a conversation to take us not only through this year's election, but into 2027, 2028, and beyond. And one, I just wanted to say to you, thank you. You've inspired me today. And two, in closing, we're organizers. And for folks who are out there listening, anything that you would offer as just, what can I do today to make a difference in my community, in our hopes for a just multiracial democracy?
Yeah, I think people need to remember that to strengthen democracy, it is about the ballot box, it is about voting, but it's so much more. It's about engaging everyday people in having a say for how our communities and our neighborhoods function, protecting our elections, making sure that we are vigilant of not only our rights, but how others are being treated, and actually caring about that. So building strong democracy is part of our responsibility. To me, it's a responsibility for the people I care about, my children, grandchildren, the people I love. But it's also it's also my responsibility as a person who takes up and breathes air in this country, as a citizen of this country. It's part of our civic engagement. So I think there is so much in this moment, Glenn. There is a lot of desire to do something. There's an awareness that something isn't right. Be part of something that makes a difference, and that takes different shapes and forms for different people. But holding back and staying on the sidelines is absolutely not the thing that we should be doing in this moment that is so crucial.
Sulma Arias, thank you so much for joining us, and wishing everybody, to your point, talk to somebody that allows you to build a deeper relationship, and find a place, a home, an organization that allows you to take action. Sulma, thanks again.
Thank you. It's been great talking to you. Thanks.
Thank you once again to Sulma Arias and the team at People's Action for joining us and helping make this conversation possible. You can listen to all episodes of Momentum or Race Forward podcast on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And before we go, we invite you to register for Facing Race 2026, the nation's largest biennial intergenerational conference for racial justice, taking place November 12th through the 14th in Raleigh, North Carolina. Guided by this year's theme, Rooted in Resistance, Powered by Solidarity, Facing Race will bring together organizers, advocates, artists, educators, and movement leaders to build strategy, strengthen relationships, and prepare for the work ahead. To learn more and register, visit facingrace.org. Until next time, let's keep the momentum going.